The wind howled like a chorus of angry spirits through the craggy passes of Eagle Ridge, whipping up snow that stung the face and blinded the eyes. Out on the frozen trail, the lone cowboy pushed his horse forward, teeth chattering beneath a frost-encrusted scarf. He had been chasing the sun all day, trying to outrun the storm that had crept up faster than he could have imagined. His horse, a lean bay named Dusty, shivered under the weight of the pack saddle, ears flicking at every sudden gust. The man's name was Clayton Hayes, a drifter with no home beyond the trail and no friends beyond the occasional campfire. He had been heading south toward the valley town of Redstone, a dusty little cluster of timber-framed buildings where he hoped to trade hides and find work. But Eagle Ridge had other plans. Snow fell heavier, covering tracks and carving rivers of white across the mountainside. Clayton squinted through the swirl, trying to spot a marker, a tree, anything familiar. But the world had disappeared under a blanket of frost. Then he saw it, a shadow moving against the snow, massive and deliberate. At first, he thought it might be another rider lost in the storm, but as he drew closer, the shape solidified into a horse, an enormous draft, gray with a coat that gleamed even through the blizzard. Behind it, a figure moved with equal grace, tall and strong, almost towering over the horse itself. She was bundled in furs, but there was no mistaking her presence. Her stance was confident, unyielding, like the mountains themselves had given her form. Clayton's breath caught. "Hello? Anyone there?" His voice was swallowed by the wind. The woman glanced toward him, and a flash of recognition passed across her face, though it could have been curiosity or mere acknowledgment of his desperation. She raised a gloved hand and beckoned, and the horse stepped aside. Clayton nudged Dusty forward. I'm lost," he shouted, hoping the sound carried. The woman didn't reply, only moved closer, guiding him toward the horse. He dismounted, relief washing over him like the warmth of a hearth he hadn't touched in months. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling from the cold and the fear that had clung to him all afternoon. "You're welcome," she said finally, her voice deep, calm, and with a timbre that somehow matched the mountains themselves. "Follow me. You're not far from my cabin, but you wouldn't last the night out here on your own." Clayton followed, treading carefully, each step a battle against the snow and ice. He noticed the woman's horse seemed to almost float over the terrain, hooves firm and sure despite the blizzard. She walked beside it as if it were an extension of herself, guiding him with a steady hand. Every so often, she would glance back at him, ensuring he wasn't faltering. "What's your name?" he asked, shivering. "I'm Marjorie," she said simply, not offering more than her first name. "Marjorie Kane. We're almost there." Clayton nodded, grateful for even that. There was something about her, an aura of command, of unspoken strength, that made him feel he could survive the storm if he kept close. The cabin appeared like a mirage, smoke curling lazily from the stone chimney. The woman opened the door and ushered him inside, the warmth washing over him like a sun breaking through clouds. The interior was simple but sturdy, rough-hewn beams, a fireplace with a roaring blaze, and a massive workbench against the wall, scarred from years of labor. "Sit," Marjorie said, gesturing to a chair near the hearth. "You'll need to warm up before you can even think straight." She set about pulling furs from the horse, brushing away snow, and leading Dusty to the back shed where he could rest. Clayton couldn't help but watch her, marveling at the ease with which she handled the massive animal. There was no fear, no struggle, only respect and understanding between rider and beast. "You ride well," she remarked casually, as if reading his thoughts. "But not in weather like that. You'd have gone down miles back if I hadn't found you." I owe you my life," Clayton said, rubbing his hands together near the fire. "I was foolish, trying to outrun the storm." "Foolish, maybe," she said, settling near the hearth herself. Her size was remarkable, not just in height but in presence. Even sitting, she seemed unyielding, like a mountain carved into human form. But there's no shame in being human. We all underestimate the ridge sooner or later. Clayton studied her, noting the calluses on her hands, the way her eyes flicked to the fire, the horse, and back to him. "Do you live out here alone?" he asked. "I do," she said, eyes narrowing slightly. "Ever since my husband passed. This cabin's been my home for 10 years now." The ridge has a way of testing a person. Some break, some endure. He could see why. She was the kind of person you trusted instinctively, the kind who could wrestle life itself into submission. The thought of trusting a stranger in a blizzard had felt impossible moments ago, but now, here in the firelight, he realized he had no choice but to rely on her judgment. Hours passed as the storm raged outside, and Clayton found himself talking, almost without realizing it. He told her about his travels, the towns he'd seen, the lonely nights on the trail. Marjorie listened, occasionally nodding, sometimes offering a word or two, but mostly she just let him speak. He felt the weight of solitude lifting, replaced by a quiet camaraderie he hadn't known he needed. When night fully fell, the wind outside still howled like a living thing, but inside the cabin, it was almost peaceful. Marjorie prepared a simple stew and bread, and they ate in companionable silence. Dusty lay near the hearth, steaming slightly in the warmth. Clayton couldn't help but glance at the horse now and then, marveling at its sheer size and strength. It had saved him too, in its own way, alerting Marjorie to his approach and offering him a bridge through the storm. Later, as he prepared to settle on a makeshift bed near the fire, Marjorie spoke. "You'll need rest. The ridge won't forgive exhaustion, not tonight." "I don't know how I can ever repay you," Clayton said, his voice low. "Not just for saving me, for everything." "You already are," she said simply, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "You made it here. That's repayment enough." He stared at her for a moment, the firelight dancing across her face. There was a strength in her he couldn't name, a towering resilience that left him both humbled and in awe. Outside, the storm would continue its furious dance through the mountains, but inside, he felt the first real warmth he had known in days, maybe weeks. And as he drifted into a deep, exhausted sleep, he realized the truth. Sometimes, survival wasn't just about the trail, or the horse, or the will to keep moving. Sometimes, it was about the people you found along the way, towering, unyielding people who could see through the storm and offer a hand, even to a stranger. Morning came pale and muted, the storm finally spent, leaving Eagle Ridge buried under a thick, sparkling blanket of snow. Clayton awoke to a strange quiet, the kind that only follows a furious blizzard. Dusty stood nearby, head lowered, pawing gently at the floor as if testing the warmth of the cabin. Marjorie was already awake, tending the fire, her hands moving with calm precision despite the frost-laden windows. "Morning," she said, without looking up. "You slept well." Yes," Clayton admitted, rubbing his eyes. "Better than I have in weeks. Thank you." "You'll need it," she replied, glancing at the trail outside. "The ridge can kill a man while he dreams if he isn't careful." He pulled himself up and moved closer to the window. The world beyond was brilliant white, almost blinding in its stillness. Tracks from Dusty and her massive draft horse led toward the distant peaks, and Clayton realized just how treacherous his path had been. I can't believe I made it," he said quietly. "I would have frozen out there." "You made it because you followed," Marjorie said simply, eyes fixed on him now. "Most men panic when the ridge swallows them. You didn't." Clayton met her gaze, seeing in it a mixture of challenge and respect. "You've lived here a long time," he asked. "Do you ever leave?" She shook her head. "Only for supplies or when business demands. Eagle Ridge isn't forgiving. It takes more than courage to leave and come back. You have to understand it, or it'll chew you up and spit you out." He nodded, realizing that her strength wasn't just physical. The way she spoke, the way she moved, even the way she handled Dusty's calm companion, the draft horse, spoke of years surviving something harsher than any blizzard. He wanted to ask more, but the weight of her presence alone seemed to demand patience. After a simple breakfast, Marjorie guided him outside. The cold was biting, but the sun glinted off the snow in a way that made the world almost magical. Dusty pawed at the ground, eager to get moving, while her draft horse snorted and stamped, steam rising from its massive body. "You'll need to get moving if you plan to leave the ridge today," she said, tightening the straps on Dusty's saddle. "But you won't do it alone." I appreciate that," Clayton said, trying to mask the relief in his voice. "I don't even know how to repay you." "Repayment comes later," she said. First, you learn. The ridge isn't like the plains or the valleys. One wrong step, and it's over. Follow me. They set off together, Marjorie leading with her massive horse beside her, Clayton trailing behind on Dusty. The trail wound through jagged cliffs and frozen streams, the snow deep enough to make every step a labor. She pointed out hidden hazards, weak ice patches, unstable rocks, and drifts that could swallow a horse whole. Clayton realized quickly that her guidance wasn't just helpful, it was life-saving. "Why do you stay up here?" he asked after a while, breaking the silence. "It's isolated, dangerous." She glanced at him, expression unreadable. "Because it's mine," she said simply. "This land, these mountains, they belong to my husband. When he passed, I could have left, but I didn't. Eagle Ridge doesn't take kindly to strangers, but it respects those who endure. I've learned its ways. It's harsh, yes, but honest." Clayton nodded, feeling both admiration and unease. He had traveled far, but he had never encountered someone like her, a woman who commanded mountains and horses and storms with equal authority. As they rounded a bend, the wind picked up again, teasing the edges of snow into drifts that threatened to block the path. Clayton struggled to keep Dusty steady, and a wave of fear crept up his spine. Marjorie's draft horse, massive and sure-footed, plowed through the drifts, her presence a constant reassurance. "You're doing fine," she called over the wind. "Trust your horse. Trust the ridge. Don't fight it." He exhaled sharply, focusing on Dusty's movements. The horse was nervous, but he had ridden him long enough to know he could follow the trail if Clayton kept calm. Marjorie moved beside him, guiding with her words and gestures, the wind making her voice almost musical in its force. Hours passed as they climbed higher, and Clayton began to notice subtle signs of her life here. Small caches of wood, cleverly hidden snow shelters, and a few traps for game. She explained them without condescension, as if imparting wisdom that was both practical and sacred. "Most men wouldn't survive a week alone here," she said, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Some try. They don't come back." "And you've lived here, how long?" he asked again, despite knowing the answer. 10 years, she replied. 10 winters, 10 summers. Alone, but not lonely. You adapt, or you die. That's the ridge. They reached a plateau where the wind gusted strong enough to steal breath. Clayton had to cling to Dusty to keep from being knocked off balance. Marjorie's horse planted firmly, unfazed by the gusts, and she turned to him. "You see," she said, "the ridge isn't cruel, it's honest. It tests everyone, but it rewards those who endure." He swallowed, realizing that her words were more than about survival. They were a lesson about life. He had spent months wandering aimlessly, running from towns, jobs, people, anything resembling commitment. Here, guided by Marjorie and her immense, steady horse, he felt something shift. Courage, respect, even awe threaded through him like fire. By late afternoon, they arrived at a small ridge cabin, snow drifts piled high against the logs. Marjorie's massive horse clopped beside hers as she dismounted effortlessly. Clayton followed, legs stiff from the cold and exertion, and helped Dusty inside. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine smoke and drying herbs. Marjorie worked quickly, feeding the horses and preparing a warm meal, and Clayton watched, fascinated by her efficiency. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. Everything she did seemed rooted in knowledge and necessity, honed over years of solitary life in a merciless place. "Sit," she said, handing him a bowl of thick stew. "You'll need strength. The ridge isn't done testing you yet." Clayton took a bite, savoring the warmth and flavor. He glanced at her, realizing he was seeing more than a woman surviving alone. He was seeing a force of nature, a guardian of mountains, of horses, of trails lost to snowstorms. And as the sun dipped low, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Clayton understood something that had nothing to do with the ridge or survival. He understood that some people exist not just to endure but to guide, to protect, to teach, and to shape those who cross their path. Marjorie Kane was one such person. The following morning, Clayton awoke to a world glazed in frost and silence. The storm had passed completely, leaving the mountains sharp and crystalline under a pale sun. Dusty pawed at the floor, eager to stretch his legs, while Marjorie's massive draft horse snorted in the corner, steam curling from its flared nostrils. "You'll need to move soon if you're headed back to the valley," Marjorie said as she fed the horses. "The ridge can be kind one day and merciless the next. You've seen mercy already." Clayton rose slowly, still feeling the chill in his bones, and watched her work. There was a rhythm to everything she did, an understanding of horses, snow, and survival that made him realize he had been wandering blindly through life before this. He swallowed his pride. I don't think I could have made it without you," he said quietly. "You followed," she replied, tying a lead rope to Dusty. "That's what counts. Courage and trust are rare out here. You had both." They set off, Marjorie leading with her draft horse beside her, Clayton following Dusty through snow-laden ridges and narrow passes. The air was thin and crisp, each breath a sharp bite in his chest. As they rode, Marjorie shared stories of the mountains, of winters so harsh that even the hardiest men had been lost. She spoke of her husband, of the years they had shared carving a life into the cliffs and valleys, and of the ridge itself, a teacher, a test, and a sanctuary all in one. "I lost him here," she said finally, voice low, eyes distant. "But the ridge, it saved me too. It taught me what to endure, what to respect. You'll see that one day." Clayton nodded, understanding her words more than he expected. He had faced storms before, but never one that demanded such reliance on another human, and never one that left him humbled by someone else's strength. They paused at a narrow pass where snow had drifted high, forming a wall nearly as tall as Marjorie herself. Dusty pawed nervously, and Clayton felt the familiar surge of panic rise in his chest. Marjorie dismounted and walked to the drift, inspecting it carefully. Her massive horse followed her lead, planting solid hooves with unwavering confidence. "You'll need to trust him," she said to Clayton, gesturing toward Dusty. "And you'll need to trust yourself." Clayton swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. He took a deep breath and guided Dusty forward. The snow resisted, pulling at the horse's legs, but step by step, inch by inch, they made it through. Marjorie's eyes never left him, and her hand was ready to steady him if he faltered. When they reached the top, the view opened into a broad valley below. The sun glinted off the frozen river winding through the snowy fields, and Clayton felt a rush of exhilaration mixed with awe. He had survived the ridge, guided by a woman who had become both a guardian and a teacher, and by horses that seemed to carry more wisdom than any man he had ever met. "You did well," Marjorie said, voice carrying pride he hadn't expected. Most men would have turned back, panicked, or been lost in the snow. "You endured." Clayton looked at her, truly looked, and saw not just strength but resilience, independence, and a quiet warmth beneath the toughness. He realized then that she had saved more than his life. She had saved his perspective, his understanding of courage, and perhaps even the chance to see a life different from the lonely drifting he had known. "I thank you," he said again, though the words felt inadequate. "I don't know how to repay you. I never thought I'd find anyone like you out here." "You survived," she said simply, her gaze steady. "That's repayment enough. And maybe, if you want, you can carry some of what you've learned back with you. Teach someone else. Endure. Respect." He nodded, heart full, realizing the truth in her words. Survival wasn't just about enduring the storm, it was about learning from it, carrying the lessons forward, and recognizing those who help you along the way. They spent the night in the cabin again, Clayton helping with chores, feeding the horses, and listening as Marjorie recounted more of her life. She spoke of winters so harsh that the ridge itself seemed alive, breathing ice and wind into every corner. She told him about the time she had ventured into town, trading hides or supplies, always returning to the mountains she called home. Clayton marveled at her independence, at the way she had carved a life of strength and dignity in a place that could have crushed anyone weaker. By morning, it was time for him to leave. The snow had softened, the sun warming the valley below. Dusty stood ready, the pack saddle strapped securely, and Clayton ran a hand over his horse's neck. Marjorie's draft horse watched silently, a massive guardian, nostrils flaring as if sensing the significance of the moment. "Take care," Marjorie said, voice firm but warm. "Remember what you've learned. And don't wander blindly again." "I won't," Clayton promised, feeling a swell of respect and something more he didn't name. I'll carry it with me. Thank you for everything. She nodded, a rare smile brushing her lips. Safe travels, Clayton Hayes. The ridge has marked you. Don't forget it. He mounted Dusty, feeling the strength of the horse beneath him and the lessons of the mountains in his bones. As he rode down the pass toward the valley, he glanced back. Marjorie stood tall beside her massive horse, a silhouette of power and calm against the rising sun. She had saved him from the storm, yes, but she had also shown him what it meant to endure, to trust, and to respect the strength of another. The trail descended into the valley, and Clayton felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had faced the ridge, and the ridge had left him changed. Dusty moved with steady rhythm, carrying him forward, and Clayton realized that he was no longer just a wandering cowboy. He was a man tempered by snow and guided by a woman who seemed as eternal as the mountains themselves. By the time he reached the edge of the valley, the town of Redstone came into view, small and dusty against the winter-white landscape. He felt a pang of longing to stay, to remain in the shadow of Eagle Ridge and Marjorie Kane, but the trail called him onward. He would carry the memory of her, the horses, and the mountains with him, a story etched into his very bones. And somewhere deep in the valley of his heart, he knew he would return. Not just to the mountains, not just to the cabin, but to the towering widow who had shown him that courage, endurance, and trust could survive even the harshest storms. As he rode, the sun breaking over the peaks behind him, Clayton felt hope, sharp, vivid, and unyielding, guiding him forward. The ridge had tested him, and he had survived, forever changed by the woman and the horses that had carried him through the storm.